why can't that be the representation of what architecture is for the common person, so that they understand that, yes, not only can you probably afford it, but there's a benefit to it. And we're not just the elitists walking around with our capes and bow ties. We perpetuate our own stereotype, and it doesn't help us.
Welcome to the Archispeak podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. Each episode, Neil Pan, Cormac Phelan, and I have a casual conversation about all things architecture, and we invite you to listen in as we talk about everything in the profession, both the good and the bad. Maybe you're considering a career in architecture, you're still in school, or you've been around the blocks of Corbusier's City of Tomorrow more times than you'd like to admit. Join us in the studio as we stand around the water cooler and talk about why we love our chosen profession. It's time for some Archispeak.
Welcome to episode 51 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And this week's show is sponsored by ArcCat, and we will have more to say about them later in the show. And we really do appreciate them returning as a sponsor to Archispeak. Really appreciate that. So to kick off the 2015 year, we thought we'd take a look at the State of the Union, so to speak, in architecture. And this is being brought about by an article from Forbes magazine, or at least Forbes online, by a gentleman named Justin Shubo, I believe. I got that name correct. And he wrote an article that's titled, "Architecture Continues to Implode. More Insiders Admit the Profession is Failing." And that's a pretty dubious little intro there for what's happening in the industry. So this article goes into quite a bit of things, and we'll probably touch on a few things. But I think generally we wanted to talk how this article really kind of sets us off on this conversation, which we're going to be talking about tonight, which is kind of the state of the union of architecture in general in the profession. And Cormac, you brought this article to our attention. What are your thoughts on kind of some of the things that were brought up in the article?
It was interesting because as I was reading it, it's got links to multiple other articles and stuff, and started to kind of follow fall down the rabbit hole and read comments and read all these different things. And, earlier before we got going, I kind of referred to it as, it almost seems like the architectural fight club where, there's so many different opinions about the state of the union as, we're dubbing it. But it just really seems like, there's so many different opinions about where the profession's going, kind of this doom and gloom idea of, if we're continue on the path that we are. And, so it's what it really led to was not necessarily anything definitive about, here's where the, profession of architecture is, and, here's what we can do to cure it. But it just came up with several more questions. And, that's really what I want to dig into, is not necessarily the meat of the article itself, but what the article is saying to me, and all of the different questions that kind of popped up as I was reading it. And I was just kind of furiously scribbling down quotes and comments and thoughts and ideas and stuff like that, and kind of want to dig into things like that.
Yeah, I think we should probably say real quick, we're going to have the link to the article in the show notes. And so you might want to read that before listening, or maybe not. We haven't spent a lot of time since reading this thinking about it, so I think a lot of our comments tonight are going to be right off the cuff.
And I think a lot of my comments are really just it's not. I mean, they go hand in hand with everything that particular article and many of the other articles that are linked in that article. So we'll actually be able to just put one article up, one link up, and when you go to it, you're going to get a whole heap load of other articles to read just through the links.
Yeah, it's kind of a rabbit hole of an article. There's lots of stuff.
But I mean, you're going to have. I'm pretty sure you're going to have as many questions as I did when you read it, because, it's a very, to kind of dig into it. One of the things that they were, bringing up is, this is kind of a rebuttal to another article that was written, but and also published. Actually, it was published in the New York Times, and it was called "How to Rebuild Architecture," and it was just an op-ed piece by Stephen Bingler and Martin Pedersen, and hopefully I'm saying those names right too. But and they were talking about where they feel like the state of the union is in their mind, in how to rebuild it, how to kind of move forward. And it comes as most of these approaches are purely related to me, kind of a very stylistic opinion. It's
surface.
These guys are, it's a very surface thing. I mean, it's well, I think the state of architecture is really bad because, we've got all these modern buildings in it, or we've got, these guys who are trying to hold on to tradition and do all of these, traditional buildings or classical buildings, or these guys over here, they're very avant-garde and look what they're doing, and oh my God, that's going to kill architecture. And it was more of how they felt the fashion of architecture is destroying architecture. And so it was that's why I called it, the Architectural Fight Club, because it was a bunch of infighting between architects and architectural critics and architectural opinionators that just, they want to kind of have their voice heard of what, and it's just a typical, it's almost like a typical Sunday afternoon with a bunch of different architects that have a bunch of different styles, and why theirs is better and why the other guy's style is going to kill architecture.
Yeah, it's a lot like religion or Mac versus PC, which often comes down to some kind of a dogmatic viewpoint where it's people love what they love, right? And so they're going to fight to the death and argue tooth and nail up against other people who have the opposing viewpoint. So I don't think this is too different from those other things. Ford versus Chevy.
Ford.
Exactly.
There is, there was one, kind of like underlying thing that all of them could agree on. And I think, maybe you guys have different thoughts on this, but there is a concerning amount of architecture or buildings created by architects. Let's kind of water it down a little bit. That, isn't putting our best foot forward. They're, they just kind of, they're watered down. They're not, it's something that's, maybe just not trying. And I'm trying to be really nice here. Because I really want to avoid just saying, really crappy. They were, it kind of goes back to the Geary, assertion of the, 98% of, architecture is shit. And, in a way, one of the things that they're arguing about is, now, it kind of has a point, it's just like, this style is bad, that style is bad, this is affecting it, that's affecting it. And they're kind of attacking each other on, what I'm considering as architecture that's at least trying. And what everybody seems to always tend to ignore is all of the architecture that isn't trying.
Is that architecture? I mean,
exactly.
Maybe everybody already knows that it isn't. I don't know.
Well, you've got all of these cookie cutter builder, developer type structures that are out there that, you can
They're
pick me up.
anonymous. Yeah.
There are these anonymous buildings that you can pick me up and put me in California or the Midwest or, here in the East, and they all look the same. It's just this watered down, kind of very distilled, kind of building.
Well, hey, Cormac, I'm going to jump in right here because I used to work in that industry, and it's not about it's all about the builder making a buck. Right. At the end of the day, right? And this was something that as an architect we fought often with our developer clients is that we wanted to create specific architecture for the place, and the builders often would come in, and depending on the let's say the cost of the project, and depending on where it was, they were always like, hey, where's our plan book? Do we have something? Because a lot of these developers, what's happened over the years is that instead of having small regional developers, you ended up getting all of these smaller guys got bought out.
Yeah. And
now they're these giant conglomerates, and, Pulte, KB, Lennar, and companies like that now own all these small builders. They've all been absorbed. And so now it's like, okay, well, we have a division in Florida, they've got great plans, they've sold well, and we want to do that here in California, or Texas or wherever they're building. And to them, it's an economy of scale. I don't have to pay the architect again to do it. Maybe there's some small changes we have to do to update it, but that's it. We don't have to start from scratch. So it's an economic decision.
It's a product.
It's a product. Exactly. It's a product economically decided upon to do. Now, I will say this, in some places here, mainly probably in the Bay Area and to a certain extent in areas in Southern California, there's some pretty strict guidelines about what you can and can't do. And there are many jurisdictions around here are always trying to push the envelope of you can't just do a plain square box with no articulation. And that's not always been the case. And so for some of our projects, we had the jurisdictions pushing us. And so we had to push the developers like, hey, you're not going to get away with just a blank box here. And, that you're pulling from Arizona or Texas or wherever they're pulling their plans from. And so this actually was brought up, or at least my comments, one of the things that came up in the article, they were talking about designs that were done for New Orleans after Katrina. And there were these, modern type designs that didn't do very well in the lower Ninth Ward area because they just didn't fit the architecture that was there. I think one of the comments was, flat roofs. It's like, hey, doesn't anybody realize it rains here? So bad idea. And they're failing. Some of them are failing. But what I thought was interesting, and one of my comments was, why shouldn't some of the architects that are out there, or later on, the other article written by Aaron Betsky, which is kind of really out there. I mean, he's kind of on the far end of the spectrum of, hey, we need to challenge, we need to push, every project should be out there. And if you're not doing that, then you ain't shit. I don't know. That's kind of where his comments were coming from. But the way I took it is, and the other guys were saying, oh, well, we need to be more traditional. And the two gentlemen you mentioned earlier, they were trying to do something that is more, what do they say here, physical and spiritual to the area. And so my thing is, I think we need some of both. I think we've got a spectrum here, and we need the Frank Gehrys out there pushing architecture in a direction, and we have to accept that architecture is not going to work for everybody, and so you're not going to, so you have to have, you're going to end up with crappy architecture on one side because people just need a place to live, and they don't really care. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, they just don't care. They don't have a design sense. They don't have a style sense. They just need a home or a building to work out of. Nobody cares. And nobody's going to give a thought to it. So I think you've got that on one side. You've got the Frank Gehrys and, the other people on the other side trying to really push modernism or, push the envelope and, who cares if it leaks, but we're pushing the architecture
forward.
I'm
sure they care, but it's still, I think I agree, it's very important that there is a spectrum, and because that's called progress. And right. It's just like these Silicon Valley companies or SpaceX or Tesla or Apple or Google or, it's all of these companies they don't push the boundary in every aspect of their business, but they push it in at least a few, if not a big majority of them, because that's the business they're in, is pushing boundaries. And to me, that's the business that some of these architects are in. And if a client wants to pay for that, I mean, why? I guess everybody gets to have an opinion about everything. But when it comes to stuff like the Louis Vuitton building, and, where they are really talking about these monuments, these objects, the fashion, I mean, really, like, if that stuff wasn't done, that those technologies, those materials never make it into the market, and we would still be building everything out of sticks and plaster, right?
Well, okay, so think about this. I like to think about the way that the car industry kind of evolves and technologies in the car industry evolve is normally through the racing industry. They try things out, better braking systems, better, handling and controlling and stuff like that, that eventually basically gets kind of dumbed down to a usable product for the everyman. And so, you've got the, regular Fords and Chevys and things like that kind of bring all of this envelope pushing technology into everyday use. And so, you've got these arguments of, all these different architects who are talking about, okay, it's only architecture if you're pushing the limits and you're like on the cutting edge, you're staying avant-garde. And the kind of more, and, I kind of wrote this little quote of, charming versus avant-garde, so to push it, to take this avant-garde stuff and push it as far as you can to make some of the make some of the things that you've discovered in this avant-garde, kind of pushing progress forward kind of mentality, make it usable kind of on the everyday scale. You normally don't say, okay, I'm going to have a whole row of Frank Gehry houses. You're going to say, here's the big Frank Gehry building, and now I've got a bunch of, more of what everybody's used to kind of buildings that, take that application and kind of, make it more acceptable to the common man, and it's kind of interesting. Some of the comments, back and forth is that, architecture is for, for almost the elitist, and, common man be damned. But,
yeah, that was the one that was in the Architect magazine, right? He said that architecture is for the people who can afford it.
Exactly. It kind of, that one always kind of just stresses me out because, we've got, we do so many buildings that are really for just, I hate to keep using the term common man, but, it's just like the lay person. It's there for, like the schools, you and I do schools, and, we may not be doing high design, pushing the limits. We try to where we can, but we also try to be smart about, where we use the money, how we use the money, because this is a building that's, for education. And how do we create spaces that make, make the learning environment, better. It's not that we're making these unsophisticated buildings. We're just trying to spread the money as far as we can to make the best possible environment that we possibly can that meets all of these different constraints and criteria. And it's not that we're giving up and just accepting, kind of a mundane building. We're trying to take what would normally be just a pushing of the envelope and kind of spreading it out.
Yeah, I was going to come back to the comment about architectures for those who can afford it. I have a feeling that there's quite a bit of truth to that, and I in my business, as a sole proprietor working on small remodels and additions, architecture is for those that can afford it, and I get a lot of that. I meet with people, and if I tell them it's going to cost approximately this much to do this for me to do it, and I get a lot of reactions. Some of them are just like, well, I can't afford that, and I can understand that. I mean, if you have a very small budget, and I'm telling you it's going to take me a 10% of that budget to do your project, only because I can't work for $10 an hour. And so I have a standard I have to maintain in order to put food on the table and to pay the bills, just like, they do as somebody who's trying to hire me. So I think there's a lot of truth to it. The people who can afford it can use it. Now, that being said, some people want that service and will pay for that service because they understand that there is a benefit. And I think that's one of the areas that architecture is really falling down, is because all of the press seems to go to the Frank Gehrys and the other folks that were mentioned in this article that are pushing the envelope. The Betsky article, that's just like, don't care about everybody else. And I think that, unfortunately, that's the perception that, going to your words, the common person sees. They see that. And I really think that is something that the profession in general needs to focus on, is that architecture is not for the elitist. It needs to be for everybody, because it's very obvious when I'm driving down the street or walking a house and I go, oh, what happened here? It's very obvious that an architect likely wasn't involved in this, because there's just very odd decisions that were made that create strange spaces. And so, I have a problem with that. That's where I think architecture is in a crisis, is that we're going to the extremes where people who can afford us are the only people that get that service. And then the perception is that, well, I'm just a common person. I just want a room addition. I don't need an architect. I get that a lot. Oh, I really don't need an architect for this, right?
It's true.
I mean, what do I need? I need a blueprint. I need a permit. And so I don't need an architect. But then all I have to do is sit down, and in like 5 minutes, I can spot half a dozen different problems with a particular layout or something. And this isn't always true, but it's like, an architect can make this better. And I really think that the profession needs to focus on, I don't know the percentage, and maybe you guys can think of this off the top of your head. The majority of firms in this country are like 5 to 8 man or person offices, and doing small projects. And it's like, well, why can't that be the representation of what architecture is for the common person, so that they understand that, yes, not only can you probably afford it, but there's a benefit to it. And we're not just the elitists walking around with our capes and bow ties. We perpetuate our own stereotype, and it doesn't help us.
Well, yeah, and this is why I think the headline makes more sense when you start to frame it this way, which is that the profession is imploding. Really what it's doing is it's the gap in between is getting much wider, right? I mean, we can see the exact mirror happening with the economics of this country, where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and there's nobody going to be left in the middle pretty soon, right? I mean, it's the same type of a thing. And the biggest problem that architecture has is that nobody knows what the heck we do. And I think I've told this anecdote before, but when I spoke with somebody who, I won't name their name, but they're affiliated with NCARB, and they did a poll, and I don't know how far reaching this was, but it was a poll of people in professional situations like doctors, lawyers, engineers, and they just asked what their perception of architects were, and the majority of and I'm obviously paraphrasing here, but it was that architects get in the way, and they keep them from, or they slow down the process of them getting what they want. And the person I was talking to, their kind of summation of what they were talking about said, well, the only thing I can say is thank God they still need us to get a permit. And this is somebody who's pretty high up on the chain here. And I thought, how long until they don't need us to get a permit? That's my first thought. Right. Because if people see that as a problem, they will find a solution to it, and they will cut you out of that equation. And the reason that could easily happen is because nobody sees the value, right? And I'm totally generalizing when I say nobody, but lots and lots and lots. The majority of people do not see the value of what we offer, and it's because we suck at telling it. We totally suck at it. We show pictures of finished buildings from the outside at sunset. We don't show what it's like, how we've made somebody's life better in this building. We suck at that. We don't tell those stories. And we are damn lucky if we have a client who will tell those stories, because that's how we're going to get our next job, right? I worked with them. They did this, this, and this for me. You should work with them too. Oh, that sounds great. I had no idea that architects do that. And so to me, like, that's really where architecture is imploding, is because we're not good at sharing what we do with people who need what we do. We're good at sharing it with ourselves.
Or something as simple as you're talking about explaining what we do and, what value we bring to the project. Another thing that we can do in this way of storytelling is, how does what we do affect what they do? How did we make their business or their school or their whatever better? I mean, through, better architecture, are we making their workers happier, and more comfortable at what they do, so that they can become more productive and things like that? And there are, study after studies that show, especially in, our line of, design right now, Evan. I mean, you and I do, schools a lot, and, what are some of the things that, studies show about improvement in, test scores and, the ability to learn and all this other stuff? It's, through the improvement of the environment, but we're not, 9 times out of 10, that's not what we're selling. That's not what we're telling them.
Well, and we also have the cards kind of stacked against us a lot of times. I know with a lot of clients that I work with, the people involved in that process are not even on the educational side of the business. They're on the finance side. They're on the maintenance side. They're, and so a lot of times I'm going to have a maintenance guy making a decision about the learning environment based on the how sturdy is this material versus, what kind of light can we get in this room? Or there's lots of what ifs all the time. Well, what if somebody kicks a soccer ball? What if somebody throws something at this? What if somebody scratches that? What if? And it's like, well, really? You can never stop asking what if questions. And so at that point, it becomes a prison. You start thinking with that mentality, and you go to, I guess, lowest common denominator, the beefiest stuff that, the smallest windows, the bulletproof. And so then, I mean, why? What? Okay, so you have to ask why, right? Well, it's because it makes their job easier. Okay, well, if I make your job, think about this. If I make your job too easy, you're not going to have a job, right? I mean, we have to get back to who the client really is, and we have to kind of inspire the people that we're working with to want to fulfill the highest and best for the actual clients of the buildings.
And actually, so here's you just kind of illustrated another way that we are, in fact, imploding. And that's, by dumbing down the building and breaking it down to its lowest common denominator so that we can make all of the other people who aren't really affected by the building's lives easier, we're essentially dumbing down, watering down, and just making something that really isn't truly architecture.
The ultimate compromise, yeah.
It's just a build. It's going and taking the philosophy. I mean, you think about, you and I were having a chat earlier before we started about kind of my favorite period of architectural history is the, late 1800s and early 1900s, where, there was such this interesting innovation. And if you think about the way that the, and this is the early onset of the automotive industry and stuff, thinking about all of the manufacturing buildings and how amazingly they were designed. And they were absolutely utilitarian, but I mean, they were also, done by architects. And if you think about how they are done today, they're big metal buildings. They're completely taken us. You were talking earlier about how to remove us from the equation, how to get the permit without having an architect. Well, those are some ways. Go pre-manufactured, because pre-manufactured, depending on the jurisdiction, there's plenty of places that a engineer or a contractor can pull it if it is a pre-approved product. The state's already reviewed it. They said, yeah, this is good to go. You just give me a site plan and, your drainage plan and your parking and all that other stuff, and you can put whatever metal building you want on there. And guess what? We're not in the equation anymore.
That also happens in residential too. I mean, I think in many states, if you wanted to pull a permit to do a single family home, you can do so. You don't need an architect for that. And that's been a big challenge, I think, for a lot of sole proprietors that are trying to do smaller projects. That's what you're up against. You're often up against, and it's less likely that an individual homeowner is going to, do a set of plans for their addition. They can. Oftentimes an engineer will do something, and the architect's cut out of that equation as well. And more often you see a contractor will come in and they'll do a simple sketch, or they'll hire some drafter to just drop a simple set of plans that aren't done very well, but they're done well enough that they get a permit. And so architects are constantly battling those perceptions and those, not only the perception, but you're also battling the cost, because the contractor has an advantage. Every stick he buys, every piece of material that they put into an addition or remodel, he upcharges, or can. He gets a discount at wherever he's buying it from, and then he charges them, usually charges the clients full price or something like that is built in. So the contractor can absorb the cost of preparing a simple set of plans. And it's really hard as an architect to battle that, because you're walking in saying, okay, well, I want $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to do a project, and they're like, well, the contractor will do it for nothing, and he still makes money on it, and so it's really hard to compete with that. And I think what architects have to do is really change that perception of, we are not the starchitect. We are just like everyone else. I mean, we've got kids, we take them to school, we live in your communities, and we're the everyman as well, or every person. And that's, I think, the message that the AIA needs to help perpetuate in their campaigns, because really they're the voice, right? I mean, they're the voice that is out there that can say something that people will hear, likely hear. It's hard for the individual architect to get that voice out there. And so I think, by banding together, to working together like that in other ways, I mean, maybe people have some other ideas about how we can get that voice out there, because we need to do that, because otherwise, as Evan said, we will get cut out of the process, whether it's on the big side, of doing larger buildings like Cormac was just mentioning, or what I'm talking about in doing the smaller projects. We're getting cut out of the process. And I think the other issue that is adding to this is, and I want to get your guys' comment because you do more of this type of stuff, is BIM, and how BIM is leading to cut us out of the process unless we take over that process. We keep giving away parts of what we're doing. And I think that's a big, scary thing that we need to take back. Over time, we've let engineering get away from us. We've let, landscaping, we've let civil, everything has gone away from us. And if we keep just giving it away, what's left?
Well, that's because of, I've always commented about that where, we're so in fear of litigation that we've subdivided our profession so much that we've basically eliminated, to eliminate the fear, we've eliminated a lot of our responsibility, and we've given it all away, given it to all of those people that you just named. I mean, we've given the control and the responsibility where we had the opportunity to, have a greater effect on a project, big or small. We've ended up giving it away.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about one way we can maybe get some of that back, and that's using ArcCat, our sponsor, actually.
Yeah. So would you like someone to draw CAD details for you, create BIM objects for you, write specifications for you? Would you like someone to do it for free? ArcCat has already done all this for you. If you search the ArcCat libraries for these products and more, free of charge, no registration required to download content, ArcCat has created a website devoted to you, the building professional, to find building product information fast and hassle-free. So check out ArcCat today at arcat.com. That's ARCAT.com. Do you have any ArcCat stories this week, Cormac?
Yes, actually, I was looking for a casework, plastic laminate casework specification, and sure enough, what was the first place I went to? ArcCat to, download it, because there was specific sections that were missing out of our office standard specification that, kind of left our spec wide open for misinterpretation. And so I went on to ArcCat and and it ended up being issued out as an addendum, and they helped me again, or saved me again.
Nice.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you very much to ArcCat for sponsoring Archispeak.
And saving me.
Exactly. So I want to get your guys' comment about BIM. Where do you see that affecting? I mean, is that an opportunity for architects to get back in the game, to start taking over and becoming the master builder again? Or are we going to be cut out of that process and I think that you guys can probably more talk specifically about that because you work on larger structures that involve all these different people, and you're using BIM to do that. Are we getting cut out of the process? Is the contractor are they cutting us out again, or do we have an opportunity using BIM to reassert ourselves back into and as the control of the master, the kind of the idea of the master builder, and will that help save architecture for the future?
Man, it's complex. It's a super complex issue because with the projects that we do, if your consultants aren't doing it too, it loses a lot of value.
Yes,
during
totally agree.
During that construction process, especially, and so there's got to be some kind of reason up front for you to actually invest in doing it. And if you're just doing it for yourself, it probably isn't going to be worth it to do it that way, because I don't think that just having a model puts you in a better position to be the master builder at all. Yeah. I honestly feel like I put out a better product because I understand the building better. But the contractor doesn't look at the BIM model. at least on the projects I'm working on. Now, I know that there are contractors out there who will take it and use it, and they will get value out of it. But in my line of work, the cost estimator doesn't use it, the contractor doesn't use it, the client doesn't use it. The consultants will use it kicking and screaming and dragging their feet the whole way. So it's a battle. And just to give you a kind of a different type of a story, one of the projects that I did a few years ago, where it was one of our earlier BIM projects, the contractor rebuilt the entire thing with all the systems themselves, and they offered that as a service to the client. And they did it. When we had already done it, they wanted to do all their own clash detection. They wanted to do all, because they were going to be building it, right? So on one hand, I could see that it made sense, but on the other hand, you could say, well, you already had this great resource. Why didn't you use it? So in that respect, it's going against us because that was a service that they offered, and they were able to convince the client to go with it. And so that worked against us in that regard.
Interesting.
Well, what's interesting about that story is that it's another example. I look at BIM. BIM right now is in its infancy. As much as we're rushing forward to use it, it's in its infancy. Evan just rattled off so many things that BIM could be doing right now that
totally capable of it.
Probably 99% of the buildings that are out there now that are in Revit or BIM or whatever other program you're using for BIM, they're not doing it. I mean, the full integration of specifications into your BIM model. I mean, you'd be able to do that. Making your life easier with doing scheduling and
coordination changes. I mean, it's the biggest thing, I think.
Exactly. And all of these things, and because so many people are reluctant to use it right now, it's really not being used to its fullest potential. So we're still decades off, to be quite honest with you, in my own opinion, of really truly being able to use BIM to its fullest extent. I mean,
I don't think it's the software company's faults, even though there are problems and there are weird ways to do things, ways you wouldn't expect. But it's more than that. You have to blame people for not actually using it. It's just like there's no excuse for people not using CAD. I mean, you could use any argument you want. You could say SketchUp. You could say BIM. It's all the same thing. Architects are very slow to change the way they work.
Right. But I think that the manufacturers of these particular software, whether it be Revit or whoever, I mean, they don't really know what the problems are, because, I mean, you are absolutely right. There's all these little odd things that, of ways that you have to draw things, or ways around things that you have to draw things, to have it, graphically look right, and so they're never really going to know that right now, because you don't have a fully integrated project in 9/10 of the project's being done, because you don't have your structural engineer and your MEP and everybody else working together to kind of get that 100% kind of BIM project. I mean, I've had this most recent project that I started working on. Our office standard is every project in BIM, in Revit. So here I am doing it's a small little, pool project, natatorium. And so I started doing the project. Nobody else was doing the project in Revit. Everything else is in CAD. And, we lost a couple of, key team members and stuff. And so I stopped and I kind of looked at it, and I was looking at the time that was being spent on it and everything else. And I just made the command decision. I'm like, you know what? I'm pulling the plug on Revit. It's going back into CAD, and it's going to be a CAD project, not a Revit project, only because the economy of me trying to, wasting time to fix models and all this other stuff, to then convert it to CAD, then to send it off to everybody else. I mean, it may seem negligible, but it's
Oh, it adds up. It's huge.
It adds up, you know. So it was
making
kind of,
PDF sets and making DWG exports and
And Neo, here's an even bigger thing is that, you know, we're gonna get to a point, you know, right now. I think one of the biggest struggles that everybody out there who uses Revit or whatever else, and I'm going to keep saying Revit because that's what I use. You know, one of the biggest struggles is to get the 2D form, the actual, you know, the print your prints to look right,
which is crazy.
To look like what, you know, CAD could produce. So you're spending this exponential effort to try to get your drawings to look right, because that's how we build everything right now. We're building it in the, you know, from the 2D paper, not from the 3D model. So until we get to the point where contractors are going to be building from the model and not from the drawings, we're not using BIM to its full potential. You know, so there's
totally agree.
So there's going to be, you know, that it's such a pain right now because you look at a set of CAD drawings and you look at a set of Revit drawings and you can absolutely tell which was done in which program, because graphically one reads better and the other one is just this weird, you know, an assembly of bad line weights and, you know, just things. There's all these things that you can just tell are just not right with it.
So if BIM can't help us, you know, reach out and take back.
Well, I think
architecture.
it could help us, but I think this goes back to where you started, which was we've given so much away, and the people we've given it away to are not adopting this technology, right?
Not yet, maybe.
Right.
I
well,
mean,
and again,
for a long
totally
time,
generalizing. So
yeah, I mean, for a long time, you know, it took a while for. I know when I, you know, going back, we did the CAD work for the engineers, right? I mean, they would take our plans, they'd mark them up, and we'd get them back, and we would actually do all the CAD work because the engineers didn't have any CAD people. Yeah. They did engineering. Well, over time, that changed. Now they do their own drawings, and there's lots of reasons why that, and I don't want to get into it. But, you know, maybe that eventually changes. But what I'm hearing, though, is that, you know, that's not going to help architecture from imploding. You know, BIM may not help us do that. Maybe it does, maybe not. But I guess I'd like to go back to how do architects communicate to the common people? And actually, what we really should be asking ourselves. Not through BIM, yeah, certainly. But what we really should be asking ourselves is, you know, how do we communicate our value to the common people? And really, the bigger question is that what's going to help architecture from imploding? I don't know. Does that even help us? Even if we are able to communicate to the common person and everybody understands that, gee, you know, architects are a great value and everyone, you know, should hire an architect to do their projects. Is that what's going to help the profession in the future?
Well, I was reading, you know, I get the daily architectural record email blast. And, you know, this month's issue of Architecture Record is about schools of the 21st century. Evan, if you haven't picked it up, pick it up. There's some good case studies in there. But so I click on the article, and there was a link to, they just had a side video, and it was about the Rural Studio. So of course, you know, me being an Auburn man and Rural Studio near and dear to my heart, I clicked on it, and you know, it was a kind of a promotional video about the 20th anniversary of the Rural Studio, and it had the professor Andrew Freer on there. Great guy, great architect, you know, just a fantastic educator. And he was sitting there and he was talking about, we're not just a fly-by-night kind of organization that comes in and does a project and walks away and doesn't really care about how the project is, you know, how it ages and you know, what happened to it after we're done. You know, we're here, we're part of the community, we're invested as much as everybody else to the success and failure of everything that's built, in this community. And, you were saying it, Neil, that, you're a dad, you've got kids in school, you are part of the community. And that's an area where we can really sell and get ourselves out of the implosion, spiral, and really just kind of educate the community on what we can do to help improve and, help improve not just their community, but our community. And so, that's one of many things that we can do, is just letting them know, the value, explaining to them and educating them on the value, but letting them know that we're not here to just, one and done and we're out. We're here. We're part of them. We're.
I've got an interesting take, or an interesting thing I want to bring up. As listeners to the show know that, I've been collecting comics for a long time, and many years ago there were no, like the writer or the artist or the inker, their names were nowhere on the covers. It was, we're buying, this book. It's Superman, it's Batman, it's X-Men, whatever it is. And that's the story you're going to read. And over time, the artists and the writers became more, in some cases, more famous in some ways, at least within the industry, than the books they were working on, to where it's been at sometimes even myself, I'm like, oh, so-and-so is going to draw this book. Well, I don't really know much about this particular character, but I really like this person's either writing or artwork. So I'm going to go buy that book. And the reason I bring this up is because most of us and most people listening to this show, or most people not listening to this show, live in a merchant-built home. And many people do. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. And so I think one thing that could help architects get their names out there a little bit more is if we can get the merchant builders out there to advertise, because one of the advertise who did the project. Because, and I know I'm kind of talking pie in the sky, this will probably never happen, but you always you drive down the freeway, Evan probably sees this more than you do, Cormac, on the East Coast, maybe because there's so much building going on down there, and as far as residential development. But you drive down the road and you see, KB project this, Pulte project that, and they put names to them, but it's like you go in, you get the brochure, you look at the floor plans and the different elevation styles, and it's like, you have no idea who actually did this. It's like, no, this is a Pulte home, and it's, such and such name. There's no reference to the architect. The architect never gets mentioned. In fact, even when they have the home builders award shows, it's like, oh, so-and-so, builder did this project. And it's like, maybe the architect gets a mention, and, but it's like, we need to get out there.
We need to sign our work.
And we need to sign. Yeah, that's an excellent thing to say. We need to sign our work, and we need to, get our work signed in the places that people see it the most. And it's like, and it's in their home, in the home they live in.
Yeah. For me, this kind of pulls it all together, because what you're talking about is you're putting a human aspect back into it, right? This is made, This was designed by a person. This was built by people. Architecture is still made by hand. And then what we're talking about is we're talking about putting humanity into architecture. I mean, that's one of the biggest, I think, negatives in these articles, is they're talking about architecture that is not, that doesn't have a sense of humanity, right? So you're talking about, how do we connect with people? We make architecture, we put the humanity back into it. And you do that in the way you're talking about, but you also do that in the way that's you're solving the problems for clients. We're making architecture is about people. And there's so many times when it's not about people. It's about the ego. It's about the object. It's about the fashion. It's about so many other things too, or in lieu of the humanity of it. To me, that's just kind of how it all fits together here with our episode.
Absolutely. That's kind of a perfect pull together.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I totally agree. That's a good summation. Well, should we wrap it up then?
Let's hear what other people have to say. I'm sure there will be lots of comments on our episode here.
Yeah. How do we not implode? How do we save architecture for future generations? Or are architects going away the dinosaurs? I mean, is that going to happen? We'd love to get some comments on this. So remember to, visit the site, archispeakpodcast.com, and leave the comments on this particular episode 51. And before we go, I want to send a thank out to our sponsor, ArcCat, for sponsoring episode 51 of the Archispeak podcast. Thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah, thanks.
And everyone else, keep subscribed and follow us on Twitter. And I want to give a quick shout out also to the Archispeak podcast hotline, which is 415-484-8496. I think we may get some people commenting on this, and feel free to call in, leave a message, and maybe we'll get it on the show.
Yeah, if you're driving right now and you can't get on the website and type in the comments, just call the number and leave a comment that way. We'd love to hear from you.
Oh, and I got to throw something out here. Somebody called me on a mistake that I made during our Christmas show.
No.
Yes. And they said, how do you expect somebody to buy you a gift if you got it wrong? And it was when I was talking about the Batman, 1966 DVDs, and I said it was the Frank Dozier Batmans. It's actually Bill Dozier, not Frank Dozier.
Oh, so they were impossible to purchase because you got the first name wrong. I get it.
Exactly. I caught some grief from a buddy.
That's pretty
of mine.
tough.
Wow.
Well, we've corrected the wrong now.
Yep.
So,
public apology.
So we have one listener that we know of. No, seriously. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And if you haven't already done so, please leave us a review on iTunes. We really appreciate those as well. Stay subscribed.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night. It's unpredictable as you forget. It's low, you can